Good morning, good afternoon, or whatever your time zone is that you are currently in. Welcome to this official BETD side event. It's the Berlin Energy Transition Dialogue this week, and we are honored to be part of this. Implementing the 2030 ambition is the name of today's webinar. I'm Nicola Bock, Head of Events at Agora Energiewende. We have the great opportunity today to learn more about how the implementation of the 2030 ambition is going on in 3 different countries on 3 different continents, because we have representatives from think tanks that we're working together with on panel later on. And in order to make you a bit familiar with this international energy transition think tank network that we have here at Agora Energiewende, I would like to introduce my dear colleague Jessie Scott, who is Director International at Agora Energiewende, and she will be introducing the concept of the INETTT to you now. And I'm very glad you're here, Jessie. I'd like to hand over the microphone to you and wish everyone a good experience and good insights.
Nicola, thank you very much, and welcome everyone, my colleagues from the network and the audience. What is the International Network of Energy Transition Think Tanks, INETTT? Well, we're a group of organizations who have decided that there is a role for think tanks, not just on the traditional issues of international relations, human rights, but also on the energy transition. The energy transition, both to achieve climate change outcomes, to decarbonize the energy system in line with the net zero climate target of 1.5 degrees agreed by the UN Paris Agreement, but also to do the energy transition in a way that delivers energy security and affordability of energy for the success of our economies. Our group includes think tanks in Europe, where we have mature, relatively wealthy economies, and it includes think tanks in emerging and developing economies. The history of the energy transition is different in those countries, but because the destination of the energy transition is the same for everybody, we work together. What is that destination? First, energy efficiency. Secondly, renewable energy, particularly to produce renewable electricity. Thirdly, electrification, using that renewable electricity to produce both direct electrification of energy loads and indirect electrification, the famous green hydrogen. And then, of course, there are some elements of carbon removal. But we work primarily on the renewable electricity and the electrification. Our think tanks are different. We work in national context, and of course, the national contexts vary considerably. But we see a great advantage to collaborating, to exchanges amongst ourselves, sharing strategic insights, sharing key resources. And we have also decided, since 2021, that there is value in becoming a joint platform towards other forums discussing the energy transition, including the Berlin Energy Transition Dialogues, including groups like the Clean Energy Ministerial. We did an official side event at the COP26 conference. So I'm delighted to work with these colleagues from around the world. We learn a great deal from one another on the challenges, the solutions, the political narratives, the implementation challenges of the energy transition and its wider economic context, which includes work on the just transition. We work on everything, in fact, from the grid integration of wind and solar, a technical issue, to what is the implication for the affordability of energy for consumers as an element of just transition, a very political and economic question. I'm going to hand over to one of our members, to the IDRI, the Institut de Développement Durable et Relations Internationales in France, to Lola. Lola will introduce our speakers, and our speakers are going to present from Mexico, from Pakistan, and from Poland. three really interesting cases as we look at how we are going to get to the 2030 targets that exist in each of these contexts as we move towards that common destination of energy efficiency, renewables, electrification. Thank you very much, and over to you. We look forward to a very high quality discussion today.
Thank you very much, Jessie, for the introduction. So after this brief scene setting, my name is Lola Vallejo. I'm the Climate Program Director at the Institute for Sustainable Development and International Relations based in Paris. And I'm really delighted to moderate today. We'll have first 3 presentations from the countries mentioned by Jessie, followed by 15-minute discussion with the panelists, either from questions that I'll ask them or from any questions that might have come up from you if you choose to send a few in the Q&A box that was introduced earlier. So without further ado, I would first like to give the floor to Luisa Sierra Brozon. Luisa is Energy Director at Iniciativa Climática de México in Mexico. And she will introduce us some lessons learned on preventing backtracking on energy reforms in Mexico. So we're looking forward to this first overview of any insights from Mexico. Here's to you, Luisa.
Thank you, Lola. I'll share my screen. And please let me know if you can see it.
Yeah, we can. That's perfect. Can you put full screen? And that will be perfect. Great.
Perfect. That's it.
Yeah.
Okay. So first of all, thank you, Agora and INETTT, for the invitation. It is a pleasure to be in the same panel as with the other great panelists that we have today. I will share with you a little bit of history and the current actions that our government is doing to backtrack the energy reform and what civil society has done to avoid it. Given the time that we have for the presentation, I try to summarize it, but key information will be left out. So if any of you is interested of knowing more, do not hesitate and contact me and I will gladly share more information. So just in brief, in 2013, the government of Peña Nieto proposed an energy reform that was approved by Congress. In terms of the electricity sector, the Federal Electricity Commission, the CFE, remained a state-owned company, but it was vertically and horizontally disintegrated. The reform opened the generation and retailing to competition, while transmission and distribution remained as state activities. An independent system operator was created, and also a wholesale electricity market, together with a short-term market and a balancing market. The reform included mechanisms to increase the participation of renewable energy sources through clean energy certificates, also with medium and long-term auctions, together with transmission rights and, the transmission rights that were done through auctions as well. The reform was aimed at increasing the efficiency of the sector and reducing the electricity rates for the population. It was expected to increase investment and also to create nearly 2.5 million jobs. The reform had the objective of increasing the participation of renewable energy and promoting the government promised that these benefits could be experimented soon after the implementation of the reform. Some of the promised outcomes indeed happened, and in the case of renewable energy, specifically for solar and wind, there was an important increase in the participation of these resources in the electricity matrix. As observed in the graph, solar and wind increased their installed capacity by 117 times and 4 times, respectively, with in comparison with 2013 values. Moreover, the long-term auctions were effective in attracting renewable energy projects. 3 long-term auctions took place and resulted in the acquisition of 23 terawatt-hour of clean energy, 23 million clean energy certificates, and 2,826 megawatts of installed capacity. These auctions were internationally recognized not only for being successful, but also because they reached low record prices that was around $21 per megawatt hour. The attraction of investment was not only for solar and wind, there was also investments in natural gas combined cycles because of the low prices that we have from the United States of natural gas. However, the energy reform, as in any other regulatory system, has and had areas of opportunity for improvement. There has not been an increase in transmission capacity, which is fundamental to further promote renewable energy. The reform also lacks incorporating the social justice component as one of its key axes. The electricity prices have not reduced significantly, and competition in retailing is still pending. Also, the potential benefits from the reform were not properly advertised and were exaggerated without considering that these kinds of reform take time to be implemented and generate results. This fact was politically used by the current administration, which has a different policy and vision. So they have tried to return the electricity sector to a state-dominated sector. The new administration took office in 2018. The federal government and the regulators have been trying to make changes to the Mexican electricity law and backtrack the energy reform. Up to now, there have been 4 attempts that started at the level of rules and regulations, but then it were raised to a constitutional level. The first attempt was the cancellation of the 4th long-term auction, in which CFE would achieve its long-term coverage requirements and acquire 3 main products: energy, clean energy certificates, and power at the most competitive prices. For this, ICM published a study highlighting the environmental and economic implications and disseminated through key actors as an important source of legal support for the preparation of lawsuits. Also, through the PMC, which is a platform in which a variety of actors converge to advance towards an energy transition, submitted comments to a public consultation. The PMC members also published a press release in the national media expressing concerns about this reform. Changes and their implications of meeting the climate change goals were also addressed, but unfortunately at this time the actions were not effective and the mechanism has been cancelled until further notice. The second attempt took place under the assumption of a lower than expected demand caused by the pandemic. The electricity market and system operator published a reliability agreement, and 1 month later, the Ministry of Energy took it to a higher level of regulation, creating a policy so that this could continue even after the pandemic. Among other objectives, it was aimed at increasing the use of fuel oil to generate electricity. These would increase the emissions, the greenhouse gas emissions, and also other pollutants affecting the climate commitments, but also the public health in the communities that are closer to the power generators. ICM played a key role and a technical role by providing inputs to policy and society, civil society, and to the private sector, so that the rights for a healthy environment could be defended. The coordinated efforts ended in the submission of 2 legal protections by Greenpeace that the court ruled in favor, and both the agreement and the policy ended without effect. The private sector also got the favor in courts and against the agreement policy. As a result of this, a 3rd attempt was executed, a reform initiative to the electricity industry law, which had 5 main aspects that hindered the renewable energy deployment, was released. Again, civil society, private sector, and academia reacted. The regulatory changes attempted the market. ICM prepared a technical analysis and material explaining the market operation and the transmission tariffs. They were disseminated through media and it had great replicability. The Mexican president and the Congress passed the reform. However, its application has also been stopped in courts. Finally, the 4th attempt was a reform to the Constitution and is still awaiting to be voted in Congress. The constitutional reform is aimed at giving absolute power and control to the CFE and reversing the 2013 reform. Again, technical inputs have been prepared. Coordinated and isolated efforts among key actors are happening right now, but the panorama is increasingly challenging. As you can see, it has been a long process defending the energy transition. This has not been perfect nor easy, and to be honest, not as effective as we would like it to be. But we have identified several lessons learned that may sound obvious, but by putting them into practice is challenging in such a complex context. The first is the importance of having civil society developing in-depth technical capacities to be able to carry out the same rigor of studies as the government. This allows that the arguments presented by both sides to be considered as equal and with the same level of certainty. Timing for this is key. You need to have a rapid response capacity to react effectively when policies and actions are presented. Otherwise, the efforts could be in vain. Creating and maintaining spaces for collaboration and coordination are necessary. Results are achieved by seeking complementarity from the strengths between our allies. Also, it is key to maintain a diversity of actors and to define clear rules of participation since the beginning. Legal and litigation actions are vital, and the results must be promoted by civil society. In Mexico, we are fortunate to have NGOs with this capacity, which have allowed us to obtain results. Finally, but not least, communications plays a key important role. Being able to translate the implications of the actions into a language in which not all the actors can understand is challenging, and especially when the reform was socialized with messages that have not been fully complied with. And above this, it is expensive and the resources are limited. So it's when you have to be creative and find the way on using the small resources with a higher impact. Thank you very much for your time. That's it, Lola.
Thank you so much, Grisa. This has been fascinating and a really inspiring presentation, not just on the advances, but also the challenges that can take place at the political level in a particular country, but also the role that knowledge and analysis can play in also at a political and almost activist level in collaboration with civil society organization. I'd like now to turn to a completely different country and case study, but giving the floor to Hamza Naeem from the Energy, Water and Climate Change Program of the Institute of Policy Studies in Islamabad, Pakistan, to tell us a bit more of his perspective on how could Pakistan deliver plans to meet a new low emission development strategy. Hamza, if you don't mind taking the floor and giving us a bit more insights.
Yes, thank you so much. So warm greetings from Islamic Republic of Pakistan, Institute of Policy Studies, Islamabad. So I'm going to share my screen.
We can see it, yeah. Perfect, thank you so much. We can, we see the display settings. If you can maybe.
I guess now it would be okay.
Yeah, okay, that's fine. Perfect,
so,
thank you.
So this is my ultimate pleasure and privilege to speak on behalf of my country and institute at this event. And this is Hamza Naeem, and I will be presenting about the integration and the planning for renewable energy uptake in the country aligned with the global 2030 ambitions. So, taking a start with, Pakistan is the home to 221 million population and ranked 5th most populous country in the world. Total installed capacity of the generation is termed as 39 gigawatts, where fossil fuel-based power generation is dominant, contributing about 60% based on coal, natural gas, and furnace oil. While the share of renewable energy merely counts 6%, which is based on solar, wind, and biomass. But we have mega hydropower projects which have significantly the larger share, making a total of 28% into the total energy mix. Along with these, there are some evidently existing issues in the power sector, which requires a very swift resolution. And the debt in power sector is on actually rise, which is due to the reliance on the expensive and imported fuel-based power generation. In parallel to it, we follow a vertically integrated buyer's market, which is monopolized by the larger power plants. And also, there are some certain issues with the centralized power planning where the demand grows significantly lesser than the anticipated. With it, around 22 million of the population residing in the rural area lack the energy provision, and grid infrastructure on the whole is obsolete and inefficient, which ultimately contributes to the higher losses. With all of this, Reliance on imported fossil fuel disrupts the power security also due to the global impacts and international economy and the political disruption going on in our world, in our globe, obviously. And among all of these challenges, a large chunk of subsidies is to be paid to balance the energy affordability for the whole nation. So moving further, it is worth mentioning that in spite of mere less than 1% contribution from the Pakistan in global carbon emissions, it is fifth most vulnerable country ranked affected from the climate change impacts. In that regard, we have pledged to increase the renewable energy share by the 30% by the year 2030. Pakistan has been blessed with an enormous level of renewable energy sources, where projection of solar, wind, and biomass is significantly very high, but not untapped. To meet this target, some of the milestones we have achieved are: Alternative Energy Development Board has formulated and adopted alternative and renewable energy policy in the year 2020 to emphasize more on rooftop solar installations, tapping the wind resources, converting biomass to energy technology, and also settling the grid, supporting grid constraints to accommodate more and more renewable energy into the integration. We have also witnessed a high rise in adoption of rooftop-based solar technologies, and around 15 gigawatt of the renewable energy projects has been committed into our planning, which is mandated to be completed by the year 2030. They are bundles of driving forces to boost the renewable energy, mainly the climate change impacts, where the impacts are very much troublesome. But along with independence from conventional source of energy is also driving the self-sustaining renewable energy provision, because the renewable energy promises more cost effectiveness than the conventional grid energy. Along it, one of the main drivers be the active participation from the capital market. But on the other hand, we are also experiencing some barriers based on the inconsistent tariff settlement of renewable energy projects, shattering the investors' confidence. Along with it, lack of modernization techniques in the grid infrastructure, which arises the hiccups to balance the intermittency of the variable energy sources, and reliance on foreign market for the development of renewable energy projects, yet another barrier, where indigenous resource and expertise shall improve and empower more towards the renewable energy uptake. So we have a transformation in hand to improve the overall dynamics of power sector and market as well. The transformation of single buyer market towards a multiple seller, multiple buyer is being realized. This liberalization of power market is expected to bring the futuristic aspects based on the fair allocation of risks and benefits, where the current ranking in the vertical integrated market has contributed the piling up of power sector debt also. Further, the government and the state shall not be called to put guarantees on the power system capacities while breaking the cash flow transparency also. It shall also improve the power security and shall move towards the indulgence of advanced technological based infrastructure, while the compelling drivers to enhance the renewable energy based projects would be also in the hand also. So this sectoral transformation is projected equally important to control the economic dispatch between the conventional and renewable energy sources, to give a level playing for the conventional as well as for renewable energy projects. So also I have mentioned it earlier in my presentation, but once again in details, one of the pressing issues has been to provide the energy to the far-flung rural areas which are quite outside the grid coverage. To achieve the ambitious targets of renewable energy uptake and rural electrification collectively, the regulations are on the course to develop micro and mini grids where grid infrastructure is equally non-existent or very big. Also, it is estimated that these microgrids shall be empowering the opportunity of electrification to about 35% of the total population, which is quite a big. Also, we have seen an appreciated rise in adoption of rooftop solar-based distributed generation, where we have 310 megawatts of capacity from rooftop solar alone itself in hand. In the last year particularly, 170% of the rise has been experienced, where residential, commercial, industrial consumers are being shaped as the prosumers of the clean energy with the utility grid, and the main driver being climate change impacts, and other being the tendency of the citizens to adopt clean energy sources by themselves. So in the conclusion of my presentation, I would like to highlight the role of civil society for achieving the national targets and how we move our working objectives for the realization. With the principle of renewable energy transition in Pakistan, we ambitiously dedicate ourselves going side by side with the international national communities, taking our government, our state institutions on board, consulting, discussing, making roadmaps, and delivering the projects to them. We look after the market drivers of renewable energy and provide interventions how they can be enhanced. And also on the other hand, assessing the barriers and preparing ourselves to intervene, how they can be washed away. We do provide insights after thorough analysis, research on the promotion of renewable energy-based distributed generation of solar, wind, and biomass, which are abundantly found with Pakistan. And also, we work and cooperate with the government sector to streamline the quality and the practices issues in the renewable energy project development. Furthermore, competitive market structure, modernization of the grids, off-grid electrification strategy, liberalization of renewable-based power generation, and not the least, monitoring of international compliances are some of the salient features and the areas where we work together with our stakeholders, which are comprising on political leadership, facilitating and regulatory bodies, academic institutions, international organizations, business entities, and many more. So with the aim to build a conducive stance of synergies for sustainable development, we have our tools comprising of research, development, demonstration, bridging the industry, academia, and the market gap, policy advocacy, publishing and airing through the print and electronic media, and most importantly, conducting the dialogues, discussions, and seminars where the objectives are just rounded to achieve the ambitious target of sustainable transition. So in the end, a humble urge to the global community to join hands to put efforts for cleaner, greener, and sustainable coexistence. So with the immense thanks from my side and regards from Pakistan and IPS, I am giving the floor back to Lola. So thank you so very much.
Thank you very much, Hamza. It was, again, really, really interesting, also following from Luisa's presentation, to see a country which is at a different starting point and is still yet to implement its energy market reform. And here, you know, the think tank that you represent is playing a different role, more supporting a government that wants to go further, as opposed to, well, trying to prevent backtracking. Let's now turn to our third panelist, coming from Poland and focusing on how to implement the energy targets of Poland despite the current geopolitical shocks, because obviously Poland is a country that will be very affected by the current geopolitical crisis and the Ukraine war with Russia. I'll now turn to Joanna Pandera, who is the president of Forum Energy based in Warsaw. Joanna, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Lola. I hope you can hear me, and I hope I managed
Perfect.
to, within the time frames which we got. Indeed, our situation is quite particular in the context that we have several crises. One is, of course, climate crisis. Then we have energy crisis in the country, which is basically related with our old infrastructure, generation infrastructure, mainly based on coal. And on top of this, we have now fuel crisis, which has its roots in the war in Ukraine. And I would like to share you, because maybe not all of you are familiar with Poland and with our specificity. So Poland originally was based on coal, and 10 years ago, over 80% of electricity generation came from coal. Now it's around 72%. We have both hard coal and lignite. In the recent years, mainly renewables have developed. It was onshore wind, but also, but this development slowed down because of some regulatory changes which current government introduced. But in the last 3 years, we have observed huge development of rooftop PVs. And Poland, we have now, the increase within 3 years was around 6 gigawatt. So it was, 3 years ago, we didn't have PV in Poland, almost we didn't have. Now we have around 6 gigawatt this is, and of course, discussion on how to integrate this energy source in the power system. What is maybe relevant is that Poland last year has decided to phase out coal. The process is very slow. So there was some agreement with miners that until within the next 20, 30 years, we will phase out coal. And now we have the situation of the fuel prices, which you can see on the slide. You can see the yellow line is gas prices, the black line is coal prices, and the blue line is basically our domestic coal, because it's the price does not relate or not always relates to the global ARA price. So basically the situation is now that we can speak about energy crisis and extremely high pressure on decision makers what to do. So we see that Poland probably in this situation, as actually this week our government decided that until end of 2022, we will phase out Russian fuels from our fuel mix. And this is something which will make huge pressure on utilities, on consumers also, on probably energy efficiency, which is the low-hanging fruit. As Jessie said, it's the one step which needs to be made. On top of this, we have also in Europe, in the last years, we had a lot of increase in the CO2 prices. This is, of course, also for such coal-reliant country as we are. It's not only, by the way, electricity generation. We use a lot of coal for the heating purposes, also in the district heating system, but even households are using now a lot of coal. Around 2 million of households, they use coal for heating purposes in single households. By the way, this is above all Russian coal, and now until end of the year we will get rid of this coal, and it will be a huge challenge on how to deliver, how to prepare our society for the next winter, because probably the coal prices for households will just increase dramatically. Already now we see 200% of the price increase, and it will be even more. What we have also now, let's say in our analysis, which we see is that energy system will face probably power deficit because the strategy which current government has does not, let's say, does not see new capacity additions which are proper to the coal phase out. And as you can see, loss of load expectation is maybe, maybe this factor is a factor which calculates how many hours the system will be not balanced. So now we have around, I think there is some challenge with some numbers, not all of them, they are visible, but now we have 7 hours, and in the analysis which Ministry of Energy prepared last year, we can see that in the next 15 years, if nothing will change, we will have actually almost 200 days when capacity will be challenged or energy system will be challenged. So actually we have prepared few steps on what government in this situation, difficult situation, can do. And certainly the step number 1 is renewable strategy and grids. We see that for Poland is really low-hanging fruits to invest in renewables. Until 2030 we can achieve minimum 50% of electricity generation in renewables. It's onshore wind, offshore wind also. We have access to the sea, and there are some projects which are already advanced, but also photovoltaics, which has still huge potential once there will be changes made on the power market side and increasing flexibility. Step 2 is strategy for gas. Gas is now, entire Europe is under huge pressure what to do with gas strategy. Because Europe consumes more than 150 billion cubic meters of gas, and Poland around now 50% of our consumption comes from Russia. Until end of year, we will have new pipe from Norway. So we will probably, without big problems, can really eliminate Russian gas, but nevertheless, the prices will be high. So we need to have a strategy for gas and basically remove gas from the sectors where it is not necessary. So there are other strategies, and certainly households are the sector when we can really advance gas phase out in order to keep some gas for industry and also in the big power system. We need a plan, transparent plan to move away from coal. It's not that Poland is coal country, so we are third in the world most biggest coal country, but it's not that we can really now increase production. So once you talk with miners, we have really, we are missing coal, which is cheap and accessible. So still the strategy for phasing out coal is necessary. Government this week presented a strategy that maybe some electricity production from coal will increase, but will not we will not invest in the new mines, and we will not also invest in new generation, which is important. So still, this is the question how to balance the system in the longer term. We have also some EU funds for just transition for the regions, for miners to change their job. And I think that the plan is still valid, that we will phase out coal by the 2035. And of course, the entire system will not work once the rules for the power market operation will not change, and the flexibility of the market will not be changed, and also rewarding different parameters of the capacity and generation will not be changed. And we have limited time, but certainly we need changes. We have now capacity market in Poland, which is basically paying coal generation to you know, for being in the system. So the system should be changed. We should convert it into clean capacity mechanism where storage and other DSR will be rewarded, but also we need scarcity pricing, which will, and also dynamic pricing in the system. So the consumers also will adjust to the changing generation. And what is also relevant, Poland is now discussing nuclear power plant, and we see new discussion about nuclear in Europe. We think that our problems will not be solved with nuclear because we need at least 15 years to build, and this is the question if other companies will be able to deliver the technology. But what is now missing in the Polish debate is really realistic planning when it could theoretically come. And this is 2035 earliest. So our problems will pop up much earlier, and we need to solve them. And certainly energy efficiency, renewables, and flexibility is the solution. So thank you very much. And I'm looking forward to the discussion.
Thank you very much, Joanna. I must say I've moderated a few panels. I've never moderated one that was so on time. Everyone has really played ball, and that's a sincere congratulations from myself and from the organizers at Agora and Ergivende as well. Thanks very much.
Lydia made a lot of pressure on us. Lydia Wojtal, who is not with us, that we should be really strict. So we did our best. That's
a good insight into INETTT, that we're all slightly scared by Lydia, or that she makes us better. I think it's a fair reflection. I think it was extremely interesting to show how the various crises were affecting Poland's situation. I'm myself very not surprised, but it's interesting that throughout all your presentations, the role of the energy market reform or energy market design plays such a huge role in the need to make space for renewable deployment. And I wonder that if, one question for all the INETT members is also what legal capacity or what legal skills do we need to have? Because whether it's through the litigation that was mentioned by Luisa, or through the energy market reform, I feel like a lot of the insights that you gain from modeling and understanding energy markets, you need to transform it into policy relevant messages, which mean they need to be translated also in some kind of legal term. So this interplay between energy systems analysis and the legal world, I find very, very interesting. And it's really striking how the challenges are common across three very, very different contexts, power mix. And that's one key takeaway from me so far. I haven't seen any question from members of the audience. So feel free again to ask a question in the Q&A box if you're watching this event live. But in the absence of any particular question, I'll take my privilege as moderator to maybe turn to you, Joanna. In your last slides, I mean, you mentioned that the really important weight that coal was playing in Poland, and I think it's interesting because that's a challenge in also many other emerging economies. How do you see the current political situation giving a boost to coal deployment? Or you showed the fact that domestic coal was so much cheaper than other energy sources. What are maybe some of the insights that you've gained in Poland's situation that could be useful to prevent a boom towards coal in other countries, countries which have lower level of development than Poland, for instance?
Mm-hmm. It's a very good question. And first of all, I need to explain that why the Polish coal is so cheap. It's not because of the market reason. It's not cheap coal anymore. It was because utilities were forced to sign agreement with mines a few years ago, where global coal was cheap. So it was really like political move why the coal is so cheap. And still we need to remember that Polish mines are highly unprofitable and they are basically on the verge of collapse. So there is a big coal company, and so they still struggle to survive. And this is the main argument why actually I think that what we really sometimes miss in this climate discussion is a different argument, that Europe phase out fossil fuels because we don't have them. This is the truth. So Poland had coal 100 years ago. It was really cheap and good quality. Now we are really missing, we need to dig more than 1 kilometer, and this is very expensive and also dangerous. Meanwhile, we have other technologies, cheaper and most promising, zero carbon. So this is the reason why we need to really phase out coal. And this is, of course, this crisis gave some new energy for coal lobby in order to say, yes, you see, it's our resource. But the truth is that it's the way to nowhere. And that I even had this week some conversation with agency which basically supervises mines, and they told us that we can maybe increase coal production by 2-3%, but not cover all imports which we now have. And Poland has around 15% imports, coal imports from Russia, because we do not have that coal. We don't have this good quality or relatively good quality coal in Poland, because the production is just falling down year by year. And this is the reality. So what we can do now is really accelerate the transition in the heating sector in households and prepare households for electrification and energy efficient buildings, which will be also challenged because of the inflation, because of very high prices of the construction sector, which we see now. It's really hard to find workforce even. So I don't want to say it will be really easy, but what we can only do now is really to accelerate and speed up.
Thanks very much, Joanna. And I think there's a lot in the current European context that supports, let's see, there's a possibility to accelerate given the Repower EU, the communication from the Commission. And we know that when European countries decide to put their hands in their pocket, and as with the recovery package that were put out after the COVID pandemic, it's possible to find funds if you make it a political priority. I think that the situation is of course very different in Mexico. Luisa, I would like to turn to you now, because I mean, it's a completely different situation where there was space created for renewables deployment and now an active backtracking or pushback from the current government. It's a situation we have to a lesser degree, but also in France, it's become a real political marker, how you stand on supporting renewables deployment. We see it now in the presidential election, where the debate is raging around that. I mean, I was wondering, besides the very specific energy market pushback that you highlighted in your presentation, are there other aspects of the particular pushback on renewables deployment, or other aspects that you feel are under discussed by the current policies that are driven by the Mexican government that you'd like to draw our attention to?
Thank you, Lola. I think it's a great question there, and it's quite complex to address it in a short time that we have. Yes, the new administration has a completely different vision on how the energy system should be, and not only the electricity system one. The current government is investing in a new refinery, to increase oil, and also it's expecting to increase oil production, even though that we have reached peak 2 times before. So they are trying also to create or to go back to the 2 key monopolies that we had before the 2013 reform. So to control or to have a state control energy system as a whole, with the Pemex, which is an oil state company, and the CFE, which is a electricity company. So it is a whole political or a policy or energy policy quite different from what we had, but I would like to say that it's completely different of the international arena that we are compromising, or that we all need, that we need to reduce emissions, and we need to see or start talking about, for example, coal phase out. We in Mexico have, for example, coal, and we have been very active in saying that coal should go out. But most importantly, in our matrix, for example, fuel oil, it's quite high, and it has an environmental and also health public health impacts that should be addressed. Also, our dependency on gas, given our close relationship with US and the great basins that they have there, it's also quite difficult to advance on an energy transition. But I would, and I'm sorry if I'm like taking another route of your original questions, but I would like to say, Lola, that not only what I said, it's not only what's happening in Mexico, and I would like to take just one more minute to say that at the subnational level, there are interesting things that are happening. For example, distributed generation, it's still increasing. The penetration of solar distributed generation has been like the increases has been twofold. So that's a really great opportunity for there, and also local governments and advancing in climate policy, but also they're trying to find like cracks or spaces for advancing in energy transition. So new business models, for example, are starting to be designed, where, for example, local communities can participate in the generation, and public governments can acquire renewable energy from those communities. So a lot of things are happening. One thing is the federal government, that it has a completely different vision, but the other in the local government that are pushing for a real energy transition. Lola.
Thank you very much, Lisa, for making that point. I'm sure you can also see this distinction in other countries. I mean, we've talked as well about the need for energy market design being a core part of reform needed in every countries, and clearly the question of also governance and which roles are applied is very important. Maybe now turning to Hamza, but others feel free if you have some thoughts as well. What are some of the most effective forums where either civil society can learn from experiences in other countries? I mean, that's definitely the purpose of INETTT. But we know there are other forums, some also involving country officials, for instance. What is your assessment of we talk a lot about capacity building, knowledge exchange. What's your honest assessment of the effectiveness of those? And, is there a specific gap, either, I don't know, sending officials in other countries or reading reports? What, in your opinion, could be the most effective way to learn from each other, to accelerate?
Yes, in Pakistan also, we have a lot of international organizations working, which has been like the Sub-Diary of United Nations. The German government is also very much emphasizing, unless we have a very good deal with German government, emphasizing the renewable energy in Pakistan, and they are working on the capacity building work, and also for the knowledge sharing, expertise sharing, etc. So within Pakistan, we are very much actually reluctant to make the indigenousness of the resources and expertise. This is why we are lacking upon. So we have the resources, we might have the all the things in hand, but we are not exploiting that thing. And for that manner, we need the developed nations, which are actually the pioneers in that, in bridging that gap and making their formalization in this regard. So actually we are working in Pakistan, the state governments, the international, and as well as some private entities are also working with the international partners beyond the border. But the thing always come in hand is about some international political economy also, as well as we have also some political disruptions going on in Pakistan, which for that manner, the government comes out and goes in and the things like that. So policy changing and inconsistent diversions are some of the reasons where some of the barriers, we can say, some of the barriers which are actually falling that back. So we are very much looking forward to have some very much good collaboration with the international partners, and here at our institute also, we are just making a space for others.
Thanks very much. Joanna, yes?
Yeah, very briefly, because I think what is very value added of the INETTT is I think that for the discussion which we have in the country, it's always good to relate to other countries. So once you talk with decision makers, it's very important to say that some policies already work in other countries, and nothing happened, nothing bad happened, because I think why decision makers, they really afraid of the energy transition is electricity prices, energy prices is always very political topic. So they want to keep things going in order not to have a threat that suddenly prices will blow up and they will lose control. And so basically showing examples of other countries and this international dialogue brings a lot of positive effects, I think. So this is why I think it's very valuable that Agora is organizing such a platform for discussion, and particularly now where the world is so dynamic in many developments, where we see in Europe actually change in policy change. So I think that in the past we really didn't see this aspect of energy security, or we put it in a false frame, because maybe we put a lot of attention, but what is now changing with energy transition is basically changing definition of what means security of supply. Which opportunities arise from renewables. In example, in Poland, many decision makers, conservative ones, they think that renewables basically it's like increasing share of gas which is coming from Russia, which is completely not true, because it's about producing electricity from the local sources, which is now in the 21st century exactly what we want to have. We want to get free of this relation with countries which can use their strength in energy sources production in order to undergo some political or military actions. So this is exactly the goal of energy transition. It's not only climate neutrality, it's about peace, it's about local energy sources and energy independence, which is exactly, so we should now frame this discussion in one, let's say, box. We should put energy security and climate neutrality and show decision makers that those topics really go hand in hand. That's from my side.
Thank you very much, Joanna. I would like to, thank again our three fantastic speakers. And if you allow me just a couple of minutes to not summarize, but maybe draw some overarching conclusions, at least for myself. I think the starting point is we're not doing enough on climate collectively. And we know there's a gap between our collective long-term targets, many countries pledging net zero, and the commitments that they took to 2030. But the really important gap is the implementation gap. And I think today's session was really key to understand the politics around implementing the energy transition in particular contexts. We know the politics play a big role. Luisa told us some really concrete examples from Mexico at the national level. And we also know that the international politics can play a huge role. And Joanna in Poland with the Ukraine war has also honed that point. But as Joanna just mentioned very effectively, I think the energy transition should not shy from being political, because we have some advantages to highlight, especially in terms of energy security in the current contexts. And also, as Luisa also highlighted, there's even in an adverse context of politics at the national level, you can still have advance being made at the local level. And I think that's also what's happening in a completely different context, but the United States, for instance. And I think what also Hamza's presentation highlighted, also echoed by others, is the real importance of energy market design. in having the right framework and rules to really accelerate the energy transition, the clean energy deployment, the electrification that Jesse mentioned in the introduction. So it's a really important that we learn from what is working elsewhere, that we give confidence to policymakers that accelerating climate action and energy transition can be good politics. And I think the INETTT partners can have a lot to contribute to that global conversation. Thank you very much, everyone, for your participation today. Thanks again to our fabulous speakers and to Agora and Nagivende for brilliantly organizing this. Thank you.
And thank you, Lola, for moderation. Excellent moderation. Thank you all. See you next time.